Sorry, everyone, I'm running a little late today. Today's class I'm sorry, everyone, because that's the Duke of Joe behind me. Very disrespectful for me not to pay my respects. So let's all, you don't have to, but I'm going to stand up and just be respectful. We have a special guest. It is the Duke of Joe is here. I'm going to stand up and take a bow. Very disrespectful to come across someone of this caliber and to not pay my salutations, as is custom. Who is the Duke of Joe? Well, we'll get there. But we did our bow. Anybody needs the time to do another bow, go ahead and take it. If you don't feel like a bow, perhaps a friendly hello to the Duke. See, when someone comes into the room that's special at a ceremony, we often stand up. Or if we're in court, it's all rise. We salute our soldiers. We shake hands. Or Asian cultures, we bow. Ways of showing respect. These gestures, on the one hand, they communicate respect. They communicate a relationship where two individuals recognizing each other in a way that is culturally appropriate. And in Confucian theory, by bowing to the Duke of Zhou, by excuse me, sorry. Saying excuse me, covering my mouth, turning away, especially in this days. These etiquettes make us better, more considerate people. These rituals, these customs, what Confucian calls the li. Okay, so we are going to continue today. This is part 2 of our series on Confucianism, and you will need both books with you today for the lecture. All right, let's, without further ado, let's get started. All right. Okay, so this is an artistic depiction of Confucius. And as we begin the class, we have our 2 main tools, which are our 2 textbooks. And this was all from last class, so I'm going to kind of talk a little fast, clearing up our confusion about Confucianism. So we know that Confucius and Confucianism from last class, we learned that these are not Chinese terms. These are terms that are used by Christian missionaries, and Confucius is a Latinized version of Kongchu. Sometimes it's referred to as master, sometimes master Kong, Kongji, and Kongfutse, sometimes Kongfutsu. These are all the different titles. For the sake of this class, we'll just go with Confucius. We are again in the Yellow River Valley civilization, and we've talked about how the history of religions in China is tied to very much the social, political rise and fall, the rise and the fall of different dynasties. We started off with the Shang dynasty, and the dynasty had its period of rising, then it fell. And according to the Chinese histories, and Chinese history writing is very, very ancient. The Chinese societies were very, very much interested in preserving records of the past for future generations. Very, very meticulous about record keeping. Well, the idea of why did Shang fall and why did Zhou emerge goes to this idea of the mandate of heaven, where we spoke about that, where so long as a ruler rules in accordance with Tian, Tian is the term, Chinese term for heaven, everything will be good. Human society will flourish, that we don't have to worry about floods or natural disasters. But if the ruler goes against the mandate, then we get earthquakes, we get foreigners invading, we get corrupt officials. These are all signs that the ruler has lost the mandate and thus has the right to be replaced. The people have a right to rebel, to engage in regicide, the killing of a king if need be. And this is, again, the Zhou dynasty is what we're focusing on for today's class. And during the era of the Zhou, Confucius is born into the state called Lu. Lu is right here on the map. Confucius, born circa around 551 to 479 BCE. His life story is based on much later sources. So we don't have any sources of his life during his actual, that were written and recorded during his actual time. There are many different stories. Some common elements, that his family had fallen on hard times. Many accounts say that Confucius's family had somewhat of a high position in the government, but they had fallen on hard times. Confucius's father dies at a very young age, and while other kids are out playing, doing playing whatever kids played back in the days of Zhou, Confucius liked to perform rituals and he liked to study, very studious. And over time, he had developed this life that's dedicated to learning the path of finding harmony. We talked about harmony as a key theme to understand Chinese religions. So harmony within self and harmony within society. This means harmony among within the family, among friends, and a harmony between the rulers and the subjects. Confucius wanted to know, what is the key to finding that? And he believed if he found the key to making society harmonious, to being kind of like a utopia, you found a path to becoming a morally perfected being, a sage. During his life, he was not very successful at influencing governments. Didn't seem to have much impact on his contemporary society, although he did attract generations of, he did attract disciples or students, who in turn attracted more students, and they would keep his teachings alive. And we'll see with the Han dynasty, the teachings will then become the main, one of the main imperial religious ideals of the time. So his disciples will keep his teachings alive long after his death, and Confucianism will flourish as a religion that is supported and sponsored by an empire. This is one of the dynastic religions, one of the three, the other two being Buddhism and Taoism. All right, so this is the Temple of Confucius, and time for a virtual field trip. We are going on a virtual field trip. Where are we going on a virtual field trip, you might ask? We start off with, technical difficulties. We're not in harmony with Tian right now, but we will be. We're getting there. We are going on a virtual field trip. We met the Duke of Zhou. Now we're going to look a little bit at the temple and cemetery of Confucius. Let's take a look.
Cemetery of Confucius and the Kong family mansion in Chufu. This is Chufu in the Shandong province in China. This fortified complex is the resting place of Confucius. The great Chinese philosopher was born and died here in the spring and autumn period of ancient China. Still today, a ceremony to commemorate his birth is held every September. The Temple of Confucius is more than 2,500 years old and has evolved over time. Every dynasty has used Confucianism as the basic philosophy to unite the nation. This is Xintan, or the apricot pavilion, where Confucius taught to his disciples. Lun Yu are Confucius's guidelines, which were recorded by his disciples on bamboo strips. One reads, "The master said, 'Is it not pleasant to learn with constant perseverance and application?'" This is Da Cheng Hall. It's the main hall of the temple. The entrance is carved with dragon figures, which was a symbol of the emperor. On the east side of the road is the Hong family mansion. Descendants of Confucius used to live here to manage the temple and prepare ceremonies. Direct descendants of Confucius used to live in these houses. Narrow and winding paths prevent outsiders from entering this area easily. Descendants of Confucius received special protection and lived here until the 77th generation of his family left for Taiwan. At the very centre of the residence complex is the North Gate that leads to the forest where the Kong family were laid to rest. Over a period of 2,400 years, more than 100,000 tombs belonging to the descendants of Confucius were brought here and surround the tomb of Confucius himself. The inscription of the tombstone means "the greatest and most respected sage, Wen Xuan Wang." Wen Xuan Wang is a posthumous name given to Confucius by Xuanzong, emperor of the Tang dynasty. In China, Confucius is venerated to this day.
All right. So we have more field trips to come in today's class, but this will be our first one. Now to continue with our story of Confucianism. All right. During the Zhou dynasty, Confucius is born in a specific era called the Spring and Autumn Era. The Spring and Autumn Era is a period of war, of chaos. At least this is what how it's remembered in the history writings. The rulers were really, really bad rulers. The citizens, they didn't know how to relate to each other. Families were falling apart. And Confucius is looking out and being like, how do we fix this? So he looked at the present, but Confucius, like many of the great thinkers of of Chinese religion and philosophies, when looking at the present, would try to find inspiration by studying the past, looking to history. So things are bad in the spring and autumn era of the Zhou dynasty. And Confucius is like, how do we restore harmony between heaven and earth? So he wants to look to the past. Now, we remember that in the Chinese history, the first evidence we have of any dynasties is the Shang dynasty. However, there is a period that's talked about in maybe the mythic past or stories of the past prior to Shang, and that was the era of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. This will include Yu the Great, who will tame the Yellow Rivers. Confucius would look to the reign of the 5 emperors and the 3 sovereigns as the perfect role models of how to govern. And society, he believed, was perfect, harmonious, and it was a complete utopia at that time. So he also looked to the early reign of Zhou, and this brings us to our special guest for today, the Duke of Zhou. The Duke of Zhou was one of the early rulers of the Zhou dynasty, and it's the Duke. Notice it doesn't say the king or the Emperor Zhou. The Duke's brother was king and passed away, and he was in a position to take the throne by force. Instead, he followed the obligation of the dynastic tradition and just held power until the king's son, the prince, was ready to take the throne. He educates the prince on how to be a good ruler. He governs and rules until the prince has come of age, and he governs rules in a way that Zhou becomes a place of a harmonious society, a booming economy, a diverse and flourishing culture of dance and music and art. Confucius did not want to create a new religion. So this is not the goal of Confucius. So Confucius does not see himself as the founder of a new religion. He wanted to restore the glorious utopia of the past and inspire the rulers of his time to govern as the Duke of Zhou did. He wanted to restore the glory days of the past. Well, how? How do you do that? One was to perfect Li, so this is ritual etiquettes norms, and through perfecting ritual etiquette norms, one could become a refined individual, a junji, or a noble moral sage, capable of governing others in proper behavior and a proper lifestyle. And that includes the king. Confucius wanted to restore the social bonds and hierarchy. He wanted to help create a society of art, culture, and dance. And this is all part of what Confucius would see as the great utopia that was present during the era of the Duke of Zhou. And he saw to develop this utopia, to restore the era, the glory days of Zhou, would require training advisors or counselors. This is kind of like the president's cabinet. These are individuals who will be capable of allowing rulers to govern according to the mandates of heaven. So Li is the broad sense is rituals. These include state ceremonies. A presidential inauguration would be an example of a state ceremony. Family traditions and custom, and honoring the ancestors. So family get-togethers for like the New Year's, celebrations of offering incense or remembering the names of the ancestors. For Confucius, this was all very, very important, but why? Why do you need to do these things? It's more a form of moral training. This refines one's character. It makes an individual cultured. It teaches an individual how to relate to others using a more refined etiquette. All of these traditions strengthen the social bonds, and through this, heaven and earth harmonize. One example of Li, this is an example of the rituals that Confucius would have seen during his time, is the state archery. So these are archery competitions sponsored by the states, and these are rituals to reaffirm social life while cultivating virtue and refinement among governing officials. Let's take a look at a little bit of archery. And we go on our second virtual field trip. Okay, as we're going on our second virtual field trip, all right. Sorry, a little technical difficulty. Again, we're going out to witness a state-sponsored ceremony, a ceremony sponsored by the government of the time. And this is the ceremony of archery. Has anyone ever here performed archery? All right. right, well, that was just one example of Li. Some other examples of these rituals, and these are customs of Li, they maintain harmony, hierarchy, and balance in society. We have family get-togethers, such as the Chinese, those that take place during the Chinese New Year, the veneration of ancestors, and the state-sponsored ceremonies, such as the archery ceremonies. But for Confucius, the spring and autumn era of the Zhou dynasty is a period of ritual decline. These rituals are declining or not being performed properly with the proper mindsets, with the proper attitude, and that's why society is breaking down into chaos, into war. So rituals in Confucianism, well, give us something to do, something positive to do with our time. Instead of going out and wasting money or getting ourselves into trouble, the rituals give us obligations to perform, ceremonies to celebrate, and ways of interacting with people that's polite and refined. Confucius believed that through our ritual practices, we develop and experience moral character. This moral character is developed and sustained through ritual. So we become a better person through the performance of rituals. And we also establish through these different ritual contexts, healthy relationships, such as the relationship between father and son, ruler and subject, husband and wife, elder and younger brother, friend and friend. These rituals, and page 209 of your textbook talks about this, do reinforce a society that was patriarchal. This means it was society was structured in a way that women were subjugated to men. And the author on page 209 raises some key questions. Is this unique to Confucianism, or is this just a sign of the time? And now in present day Confucianism, women are learning many of the traditions that were once reserved only for men. Ren, this quality of Ren, or humaneness, harmony, is something that was that's the foundations of what of who we are, this sense of humanity. Confucius believed that along with rituals, studying is important, but studying with a wise teacher. So ritual plus study with a wise teacher will allow one to create this sense of humaneness. And Confucius will find these teachings are found in the Analects. The Analects reinforce certain key ideas of Confucianism, such as the importance of a ruler to rule justly and for advisors to stand up to rulers who are ruling poorly. Here are some citations I would like you to go through and review in your readings: 17:6, 3:3, 8:18, 1:2, and 14:23. These verses have some common themes in the writings of Confucius, such as the importance of brotherly love, love between parents and children, children caring for the parents. Rulers cannot rule based on their own whim, but according to the higher rules of heaven. And also Confucius's recollection of the glory days of the past. These are all themes in these verses. Fine arts and moral refinements. Confucius believed that music and dance and and arts and poetry. These were all ways of helping to cultivate a peaceful, harmonious society and finding that inner humaneness, that inner sense of Ren. Now, our final virtual field trip, we're going to go and watch ourselves a little bit of a Chinese cultural performance. The Zhou era of Chinese history was replete with music and dance and poetry, especially the early era. Okay, so we just finished up our archery competition. Now we're going to see this is actually at the Lincoln Center here in the US. This is a Chinese dance drama, and the name of the dance drama is called Confucius. Okay. And Confucius's death and legacy. And this is supposedly the tomb of Confucius, where Confucius lies. Confucius, during his time, was not able to have great social impact. It was his disciples and their disciples that kept his teachings alive. The two major disciples were Mencius and Junzi. These two were contemporaries. They had kind of a debate. Mencius believed that human nature was inherently good, and through rituals, through study, through art and music, we kind of develop and realize that inner goodness, that humaneness, that Ren. Junzi believed we're bad, we're just wicked by nature, and that we need to be trained and cultivated through the same means that Mencius advocated. All right, and during the Han Dynasty, an individual named Dong Zhongshu will rise, and he's a follower of Confucianism, and through his inspiration, Confucianism becomes an imperial religion. It becomes a religion of the Han Dynasty, and this is the basic scheme outlined by Confucianism at the time of Han. That there is this force called heaven, or Tien, and there is the realm of the ancestors and the high ancestors. The emperor must govern based on this will of heaven, based in a way that would please the ancestors. How does he do that? He does that by surrounding himself with ministers who have been trained and educated in Confucianism, in the tradition of rituals, of poetry, of art and music. With their guidance, the king, the Han kings, can rule according to the mandate of heaven. So from the Han era to modern times, Confucianism would have huge influence on the social, political, and religious life of China. Confucius says, this is a common saying, the sayings of Confucius would be commonplace in conversation among many peoples of China. The observance of ritual traditions will be revived, largely with Confucian influence. The ideals of living a moral life, and this ideal that a government must govern according to heaven is reinforced strongly by these Confucian advisors. Yet Confucianism will not exist in a vacuum. It's going to have a dialogue with other religions. And what are those other religions? Well, this is Confucius, and this is an image of Lao Tzu, or Lao Tzu, the founding figure of Taoism, which we'll begin learning about next week. And this is the Buddha. So Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. And let's remember the point we raised earlier, that often the case in Chinese cultures, one doesn't necessarily identify with one religion or any religion at all. Someone could practice multiple religions in different contexts. They could practice Confucius, they could study Confucianism, the ideals of Confucius in school. They could give offerings to Buddhist monks as a way of getting good luck, or they may go to a Taoist temple on different occasions. So one can have no identity, no religious identity in China, while at the same time having multiple religious identities. All right, and that leaves us here. We're gonna ask the Duke if we can take our leave. And until next time, stay well, stay safe, and stay tuned.